When Bruce Wayne needed to take some downtime due to a broken spine, he needed someone to dress like a bat and fight criminals in Gotham. However, instead of getting one of his capable longtime allies for the job, he chose a guy he'd only recently met and who also had experience with costume combat. Makes total sense. Unfortunately, this new Bat wasn't exactly stable, forging himself a suit of armor and becoming increasingly brutal.
Hello, I am the Angry Spork, and today we look at the story teaming up Jean-Paul Valley, mind-warped agent of Saint Dumas, with Frank Castle, a less insane but still insanely dangerous killer of mobsters. I'm taking issue with Batman Punisher, Lake of Fire, written by Dennis O'Neil, with art by Barry Kitson, James Pascoe, and Matt Hollingsworth. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads.
The cover looks like it takes place in the middle of a firefight, with Castle blasting away with a machine gun, while Batman, or As-Bats as he's sometimes called, lunges forward, though it looks like he's about to land right in front of Frank's barrel, so I'm wondering if Valley's aim is just really bad. There's a stained glass window behind them and fire all around, which is why you always empty the lint trap in your dryer. We begin the story in the cheeriest place of all, hell! And I don't mean Michigan. A 2-page spread sees a river of fire consuming damned souls, doomed to forever burn for their lives of sin.
They were given the option of eternal torment or watch an episode of Family Guy. They chose the less painful option, obviously.
The source of the flames is none other than Saint Dumas, the holiest of heaven's chosen, who apparently spends all his time in Lucifer's backyard. Huh. Anyway, narration says he calls you a heretic, a fool, a sinner, and it turns out this has been a dream or vision from Jean-Paul Valley, waking up in his bat gear and denouncing the idea that he's anything other than a loyal servant of the saint. And he speaks aloud, though there is no one else in this huge cavern.
And he'll continue to talk to himself, out loud, in solitude, throughout the rest of the story. Will it be for clunky exposition, or because he's just so chatty he just needs to hear someone talking, even if it's only him?
JP begins wondering if he is disloyal to the Order, since he isn't wearing the Azrael getup, but figures that since his mission is to fight evil and he's acting as Batman, who does the same thing, then it's all good. He exposits about the recent theft of a formula for new rocket fuel by a Cass Reimer, whom the FBI can't seem to find. But, thanks to Bruce Wayne's resources, As-Bats knows he's tied to local criminal Tony Bresci, so he masks up for a night of trying to surpass the OG Dark Knight. Elsewhere in Gotham, Frank Castle is in a local bar looking for information on the recently relocated Jigsaw, a gangster from his own line of books, and in doing so decides to pick a fight.
Hey you, let's fight! Them's fighting words.
It's one that two rough-looking gentlemen lose before Frank trains an automatic weapon at another guy whose attire is a bit more business-oriented. It takes a couple threats, but he's told that someone working for Jigsaw is always in a downtown church at 11. Before he leaves, he acts on a hunch and grabs some papers from the guy's case. When I split, my playmate looks like he doesn't know whether to pray or puke. Maybe he'll do both.
Well, he is in a bar where people frequently indulge in alcoholic beverages, so I'd say both is probably more common. At least while they're hugging porcelain.
Meanwhile, Jigsaw delights in the footage of the incident, watching it a second time. Weird, he tells Mr. Reimer to play it back, but Jigsy has the remote. Whatever. Castle's interrogation was recorded by a small camera, and the mob boss admits he leaked information that would lead Punisher to that bar and that specific stool pigeon. As Reimer assures him the formula they stole will ignite water, specifically igniting oxygen molecules after they've been separated from hydrogen, Jigsaw anticipates Castle's arrival at the church, and douses a spider with his drink and setting it on fire.
comic book villains, where pest control and the fire marshal collide.
Putting his tiny blaze out, the scarred gangster proudly explains a plan that would not have worked in New York. Use the fuel to burn up the Gotham reservoirs, one old and one new, then use the construction company he took from Tony Bressie to repair them at an unnamed but exaggerated expense to the city. Past 11 o'clock, Frank is at St. Ludger's Church, and the only other person there is a nun that splashes him with water. He begins feeling weak and sees the sister walk off with a devious smile. My legs turn to pudding. Chocolate or tapioca? I'm seeing triple. Then now's really not a good time to watch Dawn of Justice. And there's a hot coal in the center of my brain. Clean coal or coal that actually exists? Anyway, he can't even steady his weapon as the fake nun leaves to confirm with Jigsaw that she zapped him with the drug. It was really more of a splash, but hey, I guess it's semantics, somehow. As fire begins spreading through the church, Castle fights the urge to sleep, trying to see if there's an exit behind the altar, but collapses before he can reach it. That's when the Batman Pro Tem crashes through a circular window, retrieving the now passed-out Castle. The fire eating up any other escape routes, Jean-Paul busts a hole through the floor and escapes through the basement before the church collapses in on itself. Castle comes to, he and Asbats acknowledging how they're previously aware of one another, and instead of Punisher being taken to the local police, he can work with Pointy Helmet using his knowledge of his old playmate Jigsaw, which will also lead to Tony Bressie.
And of finding the rocket fuel formula.
Rocket fuel?
Look, fella, I don't know anything about that. I just look for mobsters, point, and shoot. I'm like a photographer. That kills people.
Yeah, but they were all bad.
The two decide to put off attacking each other, at least until they find Bressie. After being told about the rocket fuel, Frank, according to his contacts, says there are renegade ex-KGB agents in town that would be interested in such a formula, and Batsreal takes them to a local Russian bathhouse. They easily get past the guards and enter the steam room, which remind Valley of his earlier vision. Well, obviously, except for the lack of both fire and ladies. No sign of Jigsaw or his playmates. Wow, Castle's been using that in an ironic context a lot in the story. Seems weird. Is that weird? Anyway, he directly asks them, and their answer is to start attacking the vigilantes, at the command of someone who just says, "Get them," with the E's replaced with the number 3.
This is how Google translates "get them" into Russian. I guess Denny O'Neil was just having some fun liberties with dialects in printed form.
Their opponents aren't bad exercise, but not exactly productive, so when Frank tells his metallic cohort he's bored, Asbats tosses him a breathing mask and releases knockout gas that takes everyone else out. When it's suggested that Reimer, Bressie's associate, might be disguised, it's distraction enough for Punisher to stealthily head out on his own. Frustrated at the betrayal, Jean-Paul calls out to Saint Dumas, who appears in a vision just long enough to tell him that steam is not fiery water, and then vanish.
Look, I've got work to do. My sword provides all the fires that roast the souls in hell. I can't come running every time you lose a tenuous ally in a bathhouse or you can't find your keys. They're always in your left pocket!
Valley leaves to find whatever fiery water is, watched from a rooftop by Castle, whose only lead now is the papers he grabbed from the guy in the bar. Most of it was in some kind of code, but he did notice the address to a penthouse, the fancy kind that fits Jigsaw's preference. While said mobster is complimenting Reimer for the fire that destroyed the church, and both look forward to destroying Gotham's water supply, Jean-Paul decides he doesn't need Punisher's help and uses the Bat computer to run a search on Bressie, finding he owns a construction company, and since Jigsaw took over Bressie's operations, figures he'd be at the skyscraper that company built.
This seems like something of a convenient leap to me. Castle did mention that Bressie had teamed up with Jigsaw, but that has kind of a more equitable connotation to it than taking over someone's operations. The latter seems more like muscling in and replacing the old power structure. I guess connecting the two doesn't come off as too big of a stretch, but the conclusion isn't all that clear, if you ask me.
It's only a couple minutes before he arrives at his destination, and it turns out that neither Bressie nor Jigsaw thought to have any security beyond a lock that's apparently easy to pick. After taking the self-service elevator, he hears Reimer mention the plan to destroy both reservoirs while water is being diverted to the new one, and how it's currently ready to go. And Jigsy gloats about how he'll own the town, since his will be the only company ready to repair the damage.
Yeah, 'cause that won't look suspicious at all, and certainly no cops would do any investigating. Is Jigsaw always this short-sighted, or do we assume he'll just pay off the cops as the developing situation deems it necessary?
Asbats bursts through the door, tackling Reimer and allowing Jigsaw to get away. After one backhand, Reimer spills his guts, saying it was the puzzle-faced mobster that put a primer in the new reservoir's main conduit, which will ignite their rocket fuel and basically turn the water into gasoline. And it's set to happen in 10 minutes. It's all Jigsaw's fault!
All I did was provide him with a volatile substance and aided in a scheme to bilk an entire city for as much money as he wanted. Honest! Wait a minute.
When he arrives at the reservoir, Jean-Paul has half a minute to stop the ensuing blaze. As he grapnels to a nearby crane for a better vantage point, he hears a distant rumble. The water has begun diverting. Either that or all of Gotham has flushed their toilets at the same time. Wait, no, the primer detonates, releasing the rocket fuel, never mind. Valley hits the conduit with the crane's wrecking ball, spilling the contaminated liquid harmlessly into the streets, then radios for the system to be shut down.
Only in Gotham can a pond's worth of flaming water be poured into the street and be considered harmless.
Jigsaw is telling someone on the phone that when Gotham gets thirsty and he calls the mayor, they'll be able to name their price. He hangs up as Punisher puts a gun to his head, not caring a whole lot who was on the other line. Weird, since you'd think he'd want to go after someone that was in cahoots with one of his rogues, but maybe he doesn't think it's his territory. Jiggs apparently had guards set up since his earlier intruder, but they obviously didn't pose a threat. And Castle's narration of his own stupidity precedes him getting smacked in the face with a phone. See, they pointed out how dumb it was he didn't shoot when he had the chance, so it's okay. Or something. Anyway, he tries throwing a knife at Jig's heart, but because he threw it at the same time he took a bullet to the shoulder, it just knocks the gun out of the gangster's hand. Convenient! Jigsaw tries to make a break for the roof. Not sure where he expects to go from there, but after being tackled and some grappling, Punisher helps him figure that out by heaving him off the skyscraper.
He might hit the pavement, but I'm really hoping he hits that Toyota. Come on, Toyota.
But then Jean-Paul Batty swings in, crashing the both of them into a lower story window, and leaves Jigsaw tied up to go deal with the Punisher. And then we get the introduction of Jigsaw's secret partner, the Joker.
Okay, hot beverage, fire, water. I'm just trying to figure out what joke he's going for here is all.
I like Mr. J and all, but his involvement seems very abrupt. This story seemed to hinge so much on Jigsy being the villain, it hardly seemed necessary to bring in a DC foe. And even then, it could have been just about anyone. Anyway, the clown, with some very funny dialogue, notes that Jigsaw needs a sense of humor, irritating the mobster until he cries out, "Cut me!"
Very poor choice of words.
Outside, Asbats catches up with Castle, and even though Skullshirt didn't want it to come to fisticuffs with someone that saved his life, it does anyway. Frank sees why crooks fear the Bat, and if he wasn't wounded, he might be able to end this quicker. As it is, he doesn't want Jigsaw getting away, so he decides not to waste any more time, and fires at the Bat's armor, hoping to take some of the wind out of his wings. But that doesn't work. Refusing another chance to surrender, Frank remembers where his former ally kept his gas grenades, releases the pin on one, and ducks away before it explodes in Valley's face. Somehow, figuring JP's breather was not operating in time to properly defend against the gas. Seriously, there's no reason for Punisher to know enough to assume this. He aims his gun at him, but decides against opening fire, admitting he cheated and walking away to go after Jigsaw.
Why would he think this would work? He already tried shooting Asbats and it wasn't effective. Does he think the helmet's going to be any less armored? From letting Jigsaw get the drop on him, looking at his wound briefly, and saying he cheated, Castle keeps talking about the stupid things he does, and then he only attempts something that would be stupid.
With Castle gone and gas dissipating, apparently only blinding him and not rendering him unconscious, Jean-Paul pleads to Saint Dumas for understanding, that he may have failed, but at least he tried. But no one arrives to grant him the forgiveness he seeks. The comic ends with the stand-in Batman standing alone amongst Gotham's buildings, finding that a soul can be silently tortured by failure and solitude as easily as hellfire.
And that was Batman Punisher. And considering the characters involved, it isn't bad.
It seemed rather fitting that in 2 crossovers with the Punisher, one of them is a temporary Batman that grew in viciousness as his tenure continued, his mind lapsing into pre-established conditioning beyond his control at the time. And it was interesting that Frank Castle's narration was first person, while Jean-Paul's was third person. Given how he keeps talking out loud to himself, maybe he's incapable of internal monologue. The story seemed more or less solid, except we never saw Tony Bressie, and Joker's appearance was kind of out of nowhere. Was Bressie just one of the clown's aliases? Was he secretly running a construction company? What's the joke behind setting Gotham's water on fire?
If the water was fed through hydrants while firefighters were trying to put out a blaze, that makes sense. As a Joker scheme.
Then again, he could be accused of ripping off Darkwing Duck. Anyway, I thought the art was good, no real complaints there. I found the narration just fine, though Castle was kind of redundant, what with his repeated use of the term playmate to refer to criminals, and how he kept acting stupid between fighting Jigsaw and Batsreal. Speaking of, I guess Joker just cut his partner loose and that was the end of it, which is kind of anticlimactic. Though there's something to be said for the last few pages. Most crossovers see the heroes fight each other when they first meet. This one has them duking it out as its closer.
In the end, it's an entertaining enough story that may not be big and showy, but it works for the characters, and is one of the rare times a stand-in of one of the bigger heroes is featured in a cross-company comic. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.